Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are strapping on our conceptual safety gear and diving into the ultimate architectural blueprint, the eukaryotic cell.
That's right.
For this deep dive, we're pulling from one of biology's core textbooks to really understand not just the names of the parts, but the stunning logic of how it all fits together.
Exactly. Think of this as a guided audio tour of the microscopic city that's inside, well, pretty much every living thing you can see. We're going to map it all out.
From the command center to the factory floor.
Right. And connect structure to function to show you why life needs this incredible level of complexity. It's, shortcut to understanding the basic unit of life.
So before we can even tour the city, we have to talk about how we first saw it. I mean, for millennia, this was all completely invisible.
Utterly invisible. You had Robert Hooke, who first saw cells in cork, but really he was just looking at the dead cell walls.
And then Antony van Leeuwenhoek, who saw the living stuff moving around. But those early microscopes, they had some serious limitations, especially with resolution.
Resolution is everything. I mean, you can think of it as clarity. It's the minimum distance you need to actually tell 2 points apart.
So you can magnify all you want, but if the resolution is bad,
It just becomes a bigger blur, a fuzzy blob. For a standard light microscope, that limit is about 0.2 micrometers, or 200 nanometers.
which is dictated by the wavelength of light itself.
Exactly. So if an organelle is smaller than that, it's basically invisible to that microscope. You simply can't see it.
And that's why the jump to electron microscopy in the 1950s was such a revolution.
A total revolution.
Yeah.
Because instead of light, they used beams of electrons. And electrons have wavelengths that are, thousands of times shorter.
So that just shatters the old resolution limit.
It brings it down to about 2 nanometers in practice. And that means suddenly we can map the entire complex internal landscape of the cell.
And it's not like there's just one kind of electron microscope, right? We have different tools for different jobs.
Precisely. If you want to see the outside of the cell, the topography,
The 3D surface?
that's when you use a scanning electron microscope, the SIM. It gives you that famous, crisp 3D image, like the surface of a trachea cell covered in waving cilia.
And to look inside.
For that, you need the transmission electron microscope, or TEM. You have to slice the specimen incredibly thin and shoot electrons through it.
So you get an internal profile, a cross-section.
Yep, and you could see the internal structure of those same cilia. And now, of course, there's the Nobel-winning technique, cryo-EM.
Where they flash freeze the samples.
Right. It avoids all the harsh chemicals and lets us see things like big protein complexes in their near-native state.
Right.
It's like taking a high-speed photo of a live event.
So cytology, the study of structure, gave us the map. But the cell is a chemical factory. To understand how it works, we needed biochemistry.
And that brings us to this brilliant technique called cell fractionation. It's how we connected the map to the factory's operations.
So how do you figure out what all these tiny organelles are doing when they're mixed together?
You separate them. First, you gently blend the cells to break them open. It's called homogenization.
Okay, so now you have a soup of all the cell parts.
A cell soup. Then you spin it in a centrifuge, but you do it at different speeds. That's the key differential centrifugation.
And at each speed, different things pellet out based on size and density.
Exactly. At low speeds, the biggest, heaviest things come out first, the nuclei.
Then you spin it faster.
Spin it faster, you get the next pellet, mitochondria. Even faster, you get little pieces of membrane. And at the highest speeds, you finally get the tiniest things, the ribosomes.
And then you can test each pellet individually.
That was the genius of it. Researchers could take that mitochondrial pellet, test it chemically, and prove, aha, this is where cellular respiration happens. It turns cell biology from just anatomy into functional biochemistry.
Okay, so now we can see them and test them. Let's talk about the two fundamental types of cells. Every single cell, prokaryote or eukaryote, has a few basics.
4 non-negotiables. A plasma membrane on the outside, the jelly-like cytosol inside, chromosomes with DNA, and ribosomes to make proteins.
And the big split is the nucleus.
Right, prokaryotes means before nucleus. Their DNA is just concentrated in a region called the nucleoid. It's not enclosed.
But eukaryotes, true nucleus, have their DNA inside a proper membrane-bound nucleus. And they have lots of other membrane-bound compartments, the organelles.
And that allows for a huge difference in size. Bacteria are tiny, maybe 1 to 5 micrometers. Our cells can be 10, even 100 times larger.
Which brings up a great question. Why aren't their cells the size of, an apple?
It all boils down to a fundamental physical constraint, the surface area to volume ratio.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, as a cell gets bigger, its volume, its internal space grows cubed. but its surface area, the membrane on the outside, only grows squared.
So the inside is growing way, way faster than the outside.
Precisely. And that outside, the plasma membrane, is the cell's only door. Everything, nutrients in, waste out, has to pass through it. If the volume gets too big, the surface area just can't keep up with the transport demands.
The demand outstrips the supply chain.
Perfect analogy. That's why cells that are specialized for absorption, like in your intestine, have those tiny folds called microvilli. It's a clever way to maximize surface area without increasing the volume too much.
That makes so much sense. Okay, let's zoom in on the heart of the eukaryotic cell. The nucleus, the command center.
The nucleus is really defined by its nuclear envelope, which is fascinating. It's a double membrane, 2 lipid bilayers, and it's actually continuous with another organelle, the ER.
And it's covered in these things called nuclear pores. They aren't just holes, are they?
Not at all. They're incredibly complex protein structures that act like, high security gates. They actively control what gets in and out.
So proteins coming in, RNA going out.
Exactly. And inside, you have the DNA organized with proteins into chromatin, and then you have that dark spot, the nucleolus.
What's happening in there?
That's the ribosome factory. It's where ribosomal RNA, or rRNA, is made and assembled with proteins to form the ribosome subunits.
Which brings us to the workers themselves, the ribosomes.
Yep, the little machines that read the genetic code from mRNA and build the proteins. And where you find them tells you what they're making.
So there are 2 types.
2 locations, really. Free ribosomes float in the cytosol. They make proteins that will be used right there in the cytosol, like enzymes for breaking down sugar.
And the other kind?
Bound ribosomes.
They're attached to the rough ER.
Yeah.
They're making proteins that are destined to be exported from the cell or put into a membrane or sent to a specific organelle, like a lysosome.
This sounds like a huge interconnected system.
It is. It's called the endomembrane system. It's this whole network for manufacturing and distribution. It connects the nuclear envelope, the ER, the Golgi, lysosomes, all linked together either physically or by these little transport bubbles.
Transport vesicles.
Right. And the main hub is the endoplasmic reticulum, the ER. It's this massive network of sacs and tubules. And there's a smooth and a rough version.
Correct. The smooth ER has no ribosomes. It's involved in making lipids, like steroids and oils. It metabolizes carbohydrates. And famously, it's the detox center.
Especially in the liver.
Exactly. It detoxifies drugs by adding hydroxyl groups to them, making them easier to flush out. But here's the kicker.
Go on.
To do this, the cell actually makes more smooth ER and more of those detox enzymes. So if you take a drug regularly, your cells adapt. They get better and faster at breaking it down.
So you need a higher dose to get the same effect. That's drug tolerance happening at a cellular level.
That's literally the cell building up its tolerance. It's an incredible feedback loop.
Wow. Okay, so what about the rough ER?
The rough ER is, well, rough because it's studded with those bound ribosomes. It's the factory for secretory proteins like insulin. These often get carbohydrates attached to them, becoming glycoproteins.
And it's also making new membrane.
It's the membrane factory for the whole cell. It makes its own lipids and proteins and then sends off patches of itself in those transport vesicles.
And those vesicles head over to the Golgi apparatus, the cell's post office.
A great way to think of it. It's a stack of flattened, unconnected sacs. And it's very directional. Vesicles arrive at the receiving side, the cis phase.
And they ship out from the other side.
The trans phase. As they move through, the products inside get modified, sorted, and tagged.
How does it know where to send everything? Like a zip code?
That's exactly the term biologists use. They get molecular zip codes, often phosphate groups, that direct the vesicles to their final destination. And the whole stack seems to move and mature in what's called the cisternal maturation model. It's a very dynamic process.
Next stop on the tour, the cleanup crew, lysosomes.
These are basically sacs of digestive enzymes. The key is that those enzymes only work in an acidic environment, which is kept separate from the rest of the cell.
Yeah.
A perfect example of compartmentalization.
And they have a couple of key jobs.
2 main ones. Phagocytosis, which is like cellular eating. A macrophage engulfs the bacterium, and the lysosome fuses with it and digests it.
And the other one is internal.
Autophagy, self-eating. The cell uses lysosomes to recycle its own old, damaged organelles. It's a constant renewal process.
And if that fails, the results are catastrophic.
Absolutely. A disease like Tay-Sachs is caused by a missing lysosomal enzyme. A specific lipid can't be broken down, so it builds up and becomes toxic.
Yeah.
It shows just how vital that recycling process is.
Okay, last stop in this system, the vacuoles.
These are basically large vesicles. In some protists, you have contractile vacuoles that pump out water. But the most impressive is the central vacuole in a plant cell.
It can take up almost the entire cell.
Up to 90%. It stores water, ions, and waste. And the water pressure it creates, turgor pressure, is what holds the plant up. It also lets the cell get big without having to make a ton of new cytoplasm, which helps with that whole surface area to volume problem.
So we've built the factory. Now we need power. This takes us to the energy transformers, mitochondria and chloroplasts.
And these two are really special because of their evolutionary history. They are the core evidence for the endosymbiont theory.
The idea that they were once free-living bacteria that got swallowed by another cell.
And the evidence is just overwhelming. They both have two membranes. They have their own circular DNA, just like bacteria. They have their own ribosomes that are more like bacterial ribosomes. And they grow and reproduce on their own inside the cell.
They're semi-autonomous.
Exactly. And their internal structure is perfectly designed for their job. Mitochondria have those inner folds called cristae.
To maximize surface area for ATP production?
Right. And chloroplasts have those stacks of discs called thylakoids to maximize the surface area for capturing light.
Okay, there's one more small organelle in this group, the peroxisome.
The peroxisome is a specialized little detox pod. It breaks down things like fatty acids, but in the process, it produces a very dangerous chemical,
Hydrogen peroxide.
HO, which is toxic.
Yeah.
But the genius of the peroxisome is that it also contains an enzyme, catalase, that immediately converts that toxic peroxide into harmless water.
So it contains the dangerous reaction and its solution all in one tiny bubble.
That's compartmentalization at its best.
All right, let's shift to the cell's internal framework, the support beams and highways, the cytoskeleton.
It gives the cell shape, support, and the ability to move. And it's made of three main types of fibers, which you can remember by their diameter. The thickest are microtubules,
25 nanometers, made of tubulin.
hollow rods. They resist compression, so they're like girders. But they're also the railway tracks that motor proteins use to drag vesicles around the cell.
And they're the basis for cilia and flagella, right?
Yes, cilia and flagella have this very specific 9+2 arrangement of microtubules. And movement is powered by dynein motor proteins that literally walk along the microtubules, causing them to bend.
Okay, so from the thickest girders to the thinnest ropes.
That would be the microfilaments, or actin filaments, only about 7 nanometers thick.
What's their job?
They bear tension-pulling forces. They're critical for muscle contraction, working with myosin, and for cell crawling, when a cell extends a little foot called a pseudopod.
And the one in the middle?
The intermediate filaments, they're between 8 and 12 nanometers, and they are the most permanent part of the cytoskeleton. They're built for durability, for bearing tension, and for anchoring organelles in place, like the nuclear lamina that holds the nucleus.
Okay, let's step just outside the cell membrane. In plants, you have the cell wall.
It's a fortress. It protects the cell, maintains its shape, and stops it from bursting if it takes in too much water. It's made of strong cellulose fibers.
And it has layers.
It does. A flexible primary wall first, then a sticky middle lamella that glues cells together. Some cells add a super rigid secondary wall.
Animal cells don't have that. They have the extracellular matrix, or ECM.
The ECM is this complex mesh of proteins and carbohydrates outside the cell. The main strength comes from collagen fibers.
And how do cells connect to this matrix?
Through special proteins called integrins. Integrins are embedded in the cell membrane. On the outside, they bind to the ECM. On the inside,
They connect to the cytoskeleton.
exactly. They form a direct physical link from the outside world to the internal machinery of the cell. It's how a cell can sense and respond to its physical environment.
And for cells to work together in tissues, they need to connect to each other. In plants, that's plasmodesmata.
Right. They're just little channels that go right through the cell walls, connecting the cytoplasm of neighboring cells.
Animal cells have more specialized junctions.
He's got three main types. Tight junctions are like seals. They make tissues like your skin watertight.
No leaks.
No leaks. Desmosomes are like rivets. They fasten cells together into strong sheets, really important in tissues like muscle that get stretched.
And the last one?
Gap junctions.
Huh?
These are for communication. They're open channels between cells that let ions and small molecules pass through. They're essential for things like your heart muscle cells, all contracting in unison.
When you put it all together, the energy systems, the transport network, the cytoskeleton, it's just this incredibly integrated machine.
It really is. The cell is the ultimate example of an emergent property. It's so much greater than the sum of its parts. Think about that macrophage again.
Right.
Its movement is actin filaments. Engulfing bacteria is the plasma membrane. Digestion is lysosomes from the endomembrane system, all powered by mitochondria, all directed by the nucleus. The whole complexity of life comes from this intricate division of labor.
We've mapped the city from the blueprints in the nucleus all the way out to its connections with the outside world.
And it really shows that life's complexity depends on this flawless internal architecture.
So, to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Well, if we go back to that endosymbiont theory, that mitochondria and chloroplasts were once free bacteria, it raises a really profound question for you to explore. Even after a billion years inside a host cell, how much of their ancestral complexity have they held onto? How much independent control do their own little DNA molecules still have over their lives?
A fascinating thread to pull on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the microscopic city we call the cell.